Hey guys, welcome back. This is a story about what if Izuku had a bone manipulation quirk with one for all. Changes occur in his life when he finally awakens his own quirk. Before we start, thank you for the support in the last video. This really means a lot to me. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and to leave a like in this video, and you can suggest a My Hero Academia fanfiction with a link in the comments if you want me to read it, and check the description for the creator of this great fanfic and support them for making this fanfic. So let's start. Chapter 8, Back into the Fray. Next. UA Grounds. Izuku made his way to the classroom with a big smile on his face as last night's date remained fresh in his mind. Opening the door to his classroom, he was greeted by a welcoming sight, his classmates talking to each other with smiles on their faces. Izuku was more than happy to see that they are not afraid to be heroes. It just made the fight against Nomu even more worth it. Ochako noticed him and happily waved to him. Izu. Turning to the sound, Izuku only managed to see a pink blur before it collided with his chest. OOF. Looking down, he saw Mina snuggling to his chest. I missed you, she said before looking up from her embrace with a wide smile. Izuku smiled back as he wrapped his arms around her waist. Missed you too, he chuckled as he looked up to see everyone's reactions. Ida was utterly confused. Bakugo raised an eyebrow at them while Ochako covered her mouth with both hands, but he could clearly see an excited grin on her face. He could only imagine the internal squealing she must be having. Looking around, he could see some of his classmates getting confused from this sudden interaction. The only ones who didn't look confused were the more observant ones like Todoroki, Tsuyu and Momo. The three were observing the duo with analytical expressions. Izuku then separated from Mina. It hasn't been that long, has it? He gave her an amused look. So what? Mina placed her hands on her hips. I still missed you, she said with a sly smile on her face, making Izuku chuckle fondly. Now his classmates were definitely more than confused by now. As far as they knew, Izuku and Mina were complete opposites. Mina was an outgoing person, and while Izuku has been to be friendly as well, he's been mostly shy at times. Heh, Minato suddenly said, gaining everyone's attention. Careful Midoriya, if people didn't know any better, they'd say you look like a couple, he finished with obvious envy in his voice. Kaminari quickly jumped in. Yeah. I mean, it's not like you guys are actually a couple, right? He said with a laugh, not realizing that he and Minato indirectly announced that they were a couple. The couple turned to each other, silently asking if this was the right moment to announce their relationship. A few seconds later, Mina nodded, indicating that now was the time. Izuku returned the nod before facing the class. Actually, a small blush grew on his face. We are, he admitted while grabbing Mina's hand with a content smile on his face, with the latter mirroring his expression. Kaminari's eyes widened. Say what now? He said in shock as others stared at the couple with equally wide eyes. Not noticing that Ochako discreetly pumped her fist in the air with a silent whoop. Yep. Mina happily chimed in. We're together now, she nodded with a huge grin on her face as she lifted their interlocked hands for everyone to see. No one dared to speak as they were processing what just happened. The couple could have sworn they could see the aura of envy begin to emanate from Minato. Fortunately, the silence was broken by that. After squealing, Toru and Ochako approached the couple excitedly. And having an idea on what they were going to do, Izuku and Mina reluctantly separated. Toru gave Mina a big hug. Girl, I want details, she begged while shaking her friend a bit. Ochako placed both hands on his shoulders. Details, she simply said with an expectant look. From their positions, Izuku and Mina looked to each other and laughed at their friend's eager excitement. Congratulations, you two. Glancing at the voice, they saw Tsuyu giving them a smile, while Todoroki and Momo did the same and nodded their heads to them. Why, you bastard! Minato fumed from his seat. How'd you get a babe like her? He cried out with tears in his eyes. Disregarding the last comment, Izuku separated from the Ochiko and faced the short teen. Honestly, he rubbed the back of his neck while they gave him their attention. I just told her how I felt. He shrugged as the response made Minato silent, but didn't make him any less envious. Nice going, bro, came the voice of Kirishima, making Izuku turn to him. Openly admitting your feelings, now that's manly. He praised with a thumbs up. Mina separated from her equally gossipy friend and faced Kirishima with a smile. Glad I have your support, Horn buddy. The hardening teen laughed before giving a toothy grin. You kidding? He pointed a thumb at Izuku. He's a good guy with a manly heart of gold, I'm sure he'll dash. Everyone shut the fuck up. Turning to the source, everyone saw Bakugo making his way to the couple with an unreadable expression. While Izuku and Mina eyed him curiously, wondering what the teen was planning to do. Ochiko and Toru took a step back from the couple as Bakugo stood in front of them. So you and her? Having an idea where this was leading to, Izuku smiled. Yep, he grabbed Mina's hand again. Me and her, he happily confirmed, making Mina smile. Bakugo smirked before turning to Mina with a scowl on his face, making her nervous in the process. Treat him right, he ordered in a serious tone as he raised his right hand. All your pieces. His palms made small explosions while sporting a feral grin on his face, causing Mina to pale a bit, but relaxed when she felt Izuku squeeze her hand reassuringly. Everyone else sweat dropped at this, not even sure what to make of his threat. Ochiko then jumped in to ease Mina's worries. Don't worry, I think he just wants the two of you to be happy. The explosive teen rolled his eyes at that and looked away with a grumble. Everyone relaxed at that, Mina herself especially, as she turned to Ochiko with a grateful expression. I'm sure we will, she leaned onto Izuku's shoulder. Bakugo was satisfied with the response and stood next to Ida, who was still processing this turn of events. Izuku then looked at Kirishima, gaining his attention. And I'll do the same for her, he promised as he wrapped his arm around Mina's waist. Earning a nod of approval from the manly teen, with some smiles from the other boys, while the girls cooed at the lovely couple. It's always the quiet ones, Kaminari grumbled to himself, only to yelp in pain from an earphone jab from Jiro, who rolled her eyes at him. Zip it! Jamming way! Jiro scolded as looked at her friend with an annoyed expression, while the rest of the classmates also voiced their congratulations to the two and wished them happiness. Though admittedly surprised, they could see that they cared for each other. While Minato and Kaminari silently grumbled to themselves and cursed Midoriya for his luck. Momo smiled at the couple before a question appeared in her mind. Midoriya? Yeah? Izuku replied as he faced her with a curious expression. I've been meaning to ask, how did you beat the Nomu? Midoriya's expression turned into one of confusion. I mean, from what I've heard from everyone else, the Nomu had you beaten, he realized where she was getting at as his face turned serious. So, how did you do it? She finished in a gentle tone, careful not to sound insensitive to his state of mind after the whole ordeal. Izuku was silent for a bit, thinking of the best way to answer the question while making sure to keep OFA out of it. Though he had a feeling that not even OFA had anything to do with it. Meanwhile, everyone else gave him their full attention, also wondering how he overcame such impossible odds. Mina glanced at Izuku worriedly, thinking that he was uncomfortable with the subject and was about to speak for him, but was stopped by when he spoke. It's okay, Mina, He looked at her with a reassuring smile that made her feel better before turning to Momo. "I'll try to tell you all I can," he said earnestly, getting a nod from Momo. With that statement, some students returned to their seats, while others relaxed from their current positions as Izuku and Mina stood in front of the class. She wanted to stay by his side and offer support if needed. "Better start with the beginning then," Izuku said, making everyone nod in response as he took a breath. "Before I fought Nomu, I saw what he did to Aizawa-sensei." He glanced around the room to confirm if everyone is listening before continuing. "I also saw the look on everyone's faces." He clenched his fists at the memory. Mina saw this and placed a hand on his shoulder. He turned and gave her a smile before continuing. "I didn't even want to think about what would happen if the villains reached everyone. So I jumped in to save Aizawa-sensei, and then faced the villains after placing him where it was safe," he said with an hardened expression, causing those who witnessed everything from the beginning to look down, remembering the feeling of dread they experienced when they saw the villains beat the pros like they were nothing. They silently vowed to never allow those negative feelings to have complete control over them again. Meanwhile, Momo and the others were in awe. It's one thing to hear it from others, but to actually hear him say that he faced great odds to protect everyone is a different experience altogether. Taking the silence as permission, Izuku continued. "I knew he was strong, but I was still surprised when he appeared in front of me in a blink and smashed me in a crater." He closed his eyes at the memory, remembering how the Nomu raised his fists to crush him to the ground and Shigaraki's laughter that followed as he laid helpless. "I remembered hearing evil laughter and everyone's cries as I began losing consciousness," he finished with a resigned tone. The room felt colder after that statement. His classmates who witnessed it winced at the memory. They remembered the feeling of their inner fire being extinguished as Izuku was seemingly killed before their eyes. Mina herself especially, it was as if a piece of her was crushed. They remembered Shigaraki's laughter echo throughout the USJ Plaza. Momo and the others looked to him in pity, thinking about the amount of pain that he must have been through. They could also imagine the feeling of dread that their other classmates felt, knowing that if they were in the same position, they would have felt the same hopeless feeling they experienced. Bakugo looked down and clenched his fists in anger. Izuku could have died facing Nomu. And where was he? Being held back by a bunch of small fry villains. Todoroki and Kirishima were having similar thoughts, wanting nothing more than to help Izuku and protect everyone else at the time. Ida looked down in regret, wondering how different things could have been if he was faster. The representative felt a hand on his shoulder. Looking up, he saw Uraraka look at him with a reassuring smile. He returned the smile, remembering that no one blamed him for being delayed. He noticed Izuku eyeing him with an expression of understanding. He nodded to him with a smile, indicating that he was fine. Mina gave Izuku a hug as she buried her face in his chest, tears threatening to spill as she remembered him being smashed into the crater. She never wanted to experience those feelings again. He may be safe now, but that still didn't mean that she would stop worrying about him. She knew that she needed to be stronger in the future, because a hero always perseveres if they wanted to save the day. Izuku looked down with guilt and held her close. He didn't like seeing her sad, and it only made it worse thinking that he was the one that caused such sadness. He gave a quick peck on the top of her hair to calm her nerves, while at the same time, he rubbed circles on her back. No one complained when they saw him comfort Mina, not even Mineta. No matter how they looked at it, the situation was dire, so one question came to everyone's mind. How did he do it? But wouldn't you know it? Izuku suddenly said, knocking everyone out of their somber thoughts. I refuse to give in, he grinned, making everyone look at him curiously. Ochako understood immediately and smiled at her friend. It's true that I felt helpless, but then, Izuku looked at his left hand. There was a burning feeling inside of me. He clenched his hand. A burning feeling that wouldn't let me give in. he looked up to his classmates as he wrapped his left arm around Mina again, the latter leaning into him as she listened. As I was blacking out, I began thinking of a few moments in my life. He looked at the window. Moments with my family. He turned to look at everyone in the room. The friends I made. He then looked down at Mina, who was staring at him tearful eyes. And finally the moments I spent with you, he finished with a smile, not noticing the amazed looks from his classmates. Mina's heart swelled upon hearing those words, and with a watery smile she separated from Izuku, but not before giving a quick kiss on the cheek. She wiped her tears, feeling much better than earlier while everyone was now listening intently, the somber feeling quickly disappearing. Facing his classmates he continued. I held on to everything, even though my body felt like shattering. I stood my ground against the villains, promising myself that I will save everyone, he shrugged. And the rest is history, he grinned before turning to Momo, who was surprised from the sudden attention. So to answer your question, I was determined. Determined? Momo repeated, still in shock from his earlier statements. Izuku nodded as he faced his classmates. I was driven by my determination to save everyone, he said with a serious expression as his eyes glowed. Everyone was looking at him in awe. If they were in his position, they would have thrown in the towel by then. Even Bakugo would, though he wouldn't say it aloud. Facing a weapon to specifically take on All Might would make anyone feel hopeless, not to mention there was no other pros around to help them. And yet, here's Midoriya, facing certain death just to protect everyone. Dude. Kaminari eventually spoke in stunned amazement. That's inspirational. Ida shouted while chopping his arms in the air. Bakugo smirked at Izuku's declaration, while others also voiced their approvals and declared to improve themselves as well. I'm fired up. Kirishima shouted in a manly tone as he flexed his arms. Tokoyami gave a small smile from his seat. A hero through and through, he said to himself. To be driven by nothing but determination, Momo said while looking at Izuku in amazement. You're truly the embodiment of going plus ultra, she praised while others voiced similar thoughts. Izuku blushed from the praise as he rubbed the back of his head. I didn't do it alone, he admitted, making everyone confused. The day was saved because all of you fought the villains like true heroes, he said sincerely, making everyone smile. Ida chuckled as he shook his head. Your humbleness knows no bounds, Midoriya, he said with a smile while Ochako nodded vigorously. Oh come on Izu. Mina said as she jumped in and gave Izuku a loving hug. Just accept the praise. She encouraged with a grin on her face. Izuku wrapped his arms around her with a chuckle. Well, without them I wouldn't have been motivated. A blush formed on his face as he looked away, much to everyone's confusion. Because you're all. He mumbled something to himself, making everyone more confused, obviously not able to hear what he said, not even Jiro. Mina leaned in closer to hear what he said. We're all what? Izuku sighed before looking at everyone with an embarrassed expression. Why you're all important to me, he stammered. So pure. Everyone thought with amused smiles while Bakugo groaned and looked away from everyone. But if anyone looked closely you could see a small smirk on his face. Ah, look at my cinnamon roll, making everyone feel touched, Mina teased as she pinched Izuku's cheek. You're such a sweetie, you know that. She giggled at her boyfriend's embarrassment. Once his cheek was free, Izuku looked down at Mina with a smile. And you're beautiful, he replied as he gave her a quick kiss on the cheek while sporting a small blush. And although surprised from the sudden gesture, Mina giggled as she buried her magenta-colored face into his chest, muttering how he was being unfair, causing him to softly laugh at her cuteness. Ochako and Toru just cooed at the couple's interaction. Damn normies, Mineta thought as he stared at the couple with obvious envy. Jiro had a smile on her face, but was quickly replaced with surprise when she heard footsteps down the hallway thanks to her quirk. Guys? Everyone immediately turned to her in surprise. A teacher's coming down the hallway. She half whispered and yelled. As soon as they heard the word teacher, everyone scrambled to get to their seats. Well, almost everyone. Homeroom is about to start. Take your seats. Ida shouted from where he stood. Izuku cleared his throat, gaining Ida's attention. I hate to break it to you, buddy, he started with a sheepish expression. But you're the only one standing, he pointed out with a chuckle, as he leaned back to his chair while Ida looked around and realized that he was indeed the only one standing. As some of his classmates snickered, Ida sat down with an embarrassed look on his face. It's all right, Ochako said from behind him, as she gave him a pat on the back. Izuku looked to Momo. Hey Momo, he called out, getting her attention. Who do you think's going to teach us today? Momo put a hand on her chin. In all honesty, I have no idea. Aizawa-sensei looked too injured to come back so soon. So it could honestly be anyone, she shrugged while Izuku nodded in understanding. With a loud bang, the sliding doors opened to reveal a shocking sight. Aizawa-sensei stood with multiple bandages wrapped in both arms. His face was also wrapped up as well. Morning, he said nonchalantly with a muffled voice. Aizawa-sensei, you're back too soon. Everyone shouted in unison. Holy shit, Kaminari said in clear shock to see the pro come in with all his injuries. Sensei, are you all right? Ida shouted in concern while raising one arm. Can you really call that all right? Izuku muttered to himself, as he eyed the pro with a wince while some of his classmates had similar thoughts. My well-being doesn't matter, Aizawa said, as he reached his desk and turned to the class. The pro then gave a quick glance at Izuku, who was nervous under his gaze, thinking that he was going to get scolded for his actions during the USJ. But unbeknownst to everyone, Aizawa had arrived earlier and overheard the conversation that his students were having. He didn't mean to pry, but when he heard that the subject was about how Izuku defeated the Nomu, he was more than intrigued to find out how. Needless to say, Aizawa was impressed from what he heard. From what he gathered, there was no trick. It was simply his drive to protect those around him, no matter the cost. An essence of a true hero. Nice going, kid, Aizawa thought to himself, thankful that the bandages concealed the small smile that he had on his face. He then turned to the class with an unreadable expression while Izuku sighed in relief. Now on to business, the battle isn't over yet, he said in his usual bored tone. Battle? Bakugo repeated with intrigue. Another one? Izuku said with a grimace, thinking that it could be more trouble. The villains again. Minato screamed in fear as he clutched his head. Aizawa wasn't fazed from the comments and continued. The UA Sports Festival is drawing near, he stated in an ominous tone. That's a super normal school event. Everyone shouted in unison. But Sensei, Jiro called Aizawa with a hand raised. Is it okay to have a sports festival so soon after the villains snuck inside? She asked in a concerned tone. What if they attack again? Ojiro added his concern as well. Aizawa replied in a calm tone. Security will be 5 times stronger than past festivals. This isn't something that can be cancelled just because of a few villains. Isn't that a good enough reason to cancel? Minato asked in fear. Izuku turned to Minato with an eyebrow raised. Haven't you been to one? Of course I have. Minato said as he leaned onto his desk. But that's not what I mean, he finished in exasperation. Aizawa continued. Our sports festival is one of Japan's biggest events. In the past, the Olympics were called the Festival of Sports and the whole country was crazy about them. But as you know, with the reduction in scale and population, they are now a shell of their former glory. In its place, Japan has the UA Sports Festival, he informed as he glanced around the room. A serious look formed onto his face. The path to becoming a hero starts here. If you gain the attention of a well-known hero, then your chances of gaining a lot more experience and popularity will be higher. Everyone was at the edge of their seats. Time is limited, you only get 3 chances in this annual event. So don't go slacking off, he declared. Yes, sir. Everyone shouted in determination. Satisfied with the response, Izawa nodded. Homeroom is dismissed, he announced before leaving the room. With the teacher gone, everyone started discussing amongst themselves. Apart from Bakugo, who told the group that he was going to have his lunch early, leaving Izuku and the rest to discuss with their fellow classmates. Man Shoji, Kaminari sat on his desk. Your strength already stands out, he said with a sigh. Izuku chimed in. But Kaminari, he said, gaining everyone's attention. There's no point in raw strength without showing other uses, he pointed out while Shoji nodded in agreement. Don't worry, Jiro started. I'm sure you'll be way more noticeable, she snickered while trying to hold in her laughter, making Kaminari sulk. Izuku chuckled as he turned to Ida. Everyone's really fired up, huh? He said in amusement. Enrolling in UA comes with being fired up, Ida replied while shaking his hips a bit. Nice moves, dude, Mina said with a laugh, though it didn't stop Ida from moving his hips still. Izuku chuckled as he wrapped an arm around Mina. Well, I guess we have our own way of showing it, he grinned while she nodded in agreement, as she leaned onto his shoulder. Guys? Turning to the voice, they greeted by a very serious-looking Ochako, with a very intense aura around her. Let's do our best, she declared with a serious tone, which kind of made her out of place. Speaking of own ways to show it, Izuku thought with a chuckle as he stared at his good friend. Buddy. He separated from Mina. Your face looks a bit scary, he pointed out with caution, not expecting his bubbly friend to ever have that expression. Mina tilted her head as she stared at Ochako. You don't look so carefree anymore. Mineta's face blushed. Maybe it's Dash. Before he could say anything, he noticed Izuku giving him a smile. It looked normal to anyone, but Mina could tell there was danger behind it. I wouldn't finish that statement, buddy, the OFA user warned in a calm tone, prompting Mineta to cover his mouth with both hands before vigorously nodding in agreement. Before Mina could comment how awesome that was, Ochako turned to the rest of the class with her fist in the air. I'm gonna do my best, she declared in her newly found scary tone. Why yeah, the rest of the class cheered, though a bit caught off guard. Outside the classroom after class, as Izuku and Ida followed behind Mina and Ochako, who were happily talking about their date night. Sheesh, Ochako, he said, gaining everyone's attention. You were pretty intense back there. I mean, what got you so fired up anyway? Ochako for some reason blushed from the question and looked nervous as everyone turned to her. Well, it's because. She started though with some hesitation. Becoming a pro hero could be a good chance for me to earn money, she admitted with an embarrassed expression. The group stopped walking as they digested her words with surprised looks. So, Izuku started. You want to become a hero for money? He tilted his head in interest. Ochako rubbed the back of her head with a blush on her face. Why yeah, that's right, she covered her face with her hands. This is so embarrassing. She squeaked behind her hands while shaking her head. Why would it be embarrassing to want to have a more comfortable life? Ida shouted as he waved his arms around. Mina happily chimed in. Yeah, even I wouldn't mind earning a fair amount to make my life a bit cozier, she admitted while Izuku nodded in agreement. Ochako looked away from the trio. I work for my family's construction company, but there's no work for us, so we ended up broke, she said in a somber tone. Construction, Ida said with an intrigued expression. Izuku then turned to the taller teen. Wouldn't a quirk like hers be useful in that line of work? I mean, you wouldn't need any additional equipment with her quirk to do the heavy lifting, he pointed out while Mina nodded in agreement. Right? Ochako suddenly sprang to life, startling the trio before she frowned. But my parents didn't want me to work for them. Instead they just want me to reach for my dreams, she sighed as she looked to her feet. She gripped her skirt and looked up with a determined expression. I want to become a hero and earn enough money to make my parents' lives easier, she declared with conviction, stunning the group. The silence was eventually broken by Ida suddenly clapping his hands above his head. Bravo! Bravo! He cheered with enthusiasm that would have made Izuku and Mina laugh, but this was hardly the time. Though it was funny to see. She's been thinking about reality, Izuku thought with a smile on his face. You know. He gained her attention while Ida kept on clapping. In case it still isn't enough, when we become pro-heroes, you'll have my support, he said with a grin. Why you don't have dash, she was about to protest. Hey now, Izuku gently interrupted, I thought you knew by now that I'll always help my friends, he said with a big smile and a thumbs up. Deku. Ochako replied as tears began to form. Mina jumped in and gave Ochako a hug. And you'll have mine too, she happily promised. Why you guys? Ochako cried into Mina's embrace. I have such good friends, she thought with tears while the pink teen started comforting her. Ida was still clapping and shouting. Ha! 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 With the scene effectively disrupted, the teens snapped to a corner where the laugh was slowly getting closer. Young Midoriya. The voice was getting closer, but by this time everyone knew who was here. All Might in all his glory popped out of the corner, startling the four. Is here. He finished with heroism, as he pointed to Izuku. All Might. The four shouted in surprise. What are you doing here? Izuku asked with a shocked expression. From the corner, All Might proudly replied. Lunch? He held out a small packed lunch. Wanna eat together? He asked in a hopeful tone. He's like a maiden, Ochako and Mina said at the same time as they laughed. Izuku chuckled before shrugging. I'd love to, but why the sudden gesture? He asked in a curious tone, prompting the other three to pay more attention to the exchange. All Might then stepped out of the corner and stood in front of the group. Think of it as a thank you for your valor during the USJ attack, he explained in a proud voice. Whoa! That's so cool, Deku, Ochako said as she waved her arms in excitement while Ida nodded in agreement. Mina then wrapped her arms around Izuku as she leaned onto his back. Look at you, getting the attention of All Might of all people, she teased with a grin while she rested her chin on his shoulder, making Izuku chuckle. All Might was curious about the duo's interaction, but decided not to pry. He'll leave it to his successor to share or keep it to himself. From his position, Izuku turned to All Might. Well, if that's the case, then shouldn't everyone else be joining us? He said, making the three confused, but All Might seemed to understand what he meant and felt even prouder. I mean, I wasn't the only one that fought like a hero that day. Everyone gave it their all, he stated sincerely, making his classmates smile. Humble to the bone, All Might joked in his thoughts as he looked at his successor with a proud grin. From what he's seen so far, he shouldn't even be surprised to see his successor willing to share the credit with everyone. Or at least make his deeds seem smaller compared to what others have been doing. Mina then separated from Izuku and placed her hands on her hips. "Oh, come on, Izu. You should just go." She pouted at him. Ida quickly voiced his agreement. "Indeed, Midoriya." He waved his arms around. "Though we appreciate the gesture, it's you that earned this reward," he stated earnestly. "Yeah," Ochako joined in. "You totally deserve it." Izuku looked uncertain. But nothing, mister." Mina interrupted while pushing Izuku towards All Might. "Now go enjoy your lunch," she ordered with a playful shove. With a chuckle, Izuku looked back with a smile. "All right, guess I'll catch up with you guys later," he said with a grin. His friends nodded as they made their way to the cafeteria, while Izuku went with All Might to his office. Cafeteria. The trio were currently in line, waiting for their turn to get their food. "Man, Izu's too modest for his own good," Mina said with a sigh as she shook her head. She admired his attitude, but she wouldn't like him any less if he gave himself some more credit. "That's just the way he is," Ochako giggled. "Even when we first met he always showed how he cared for others," she shared fondly, as she remembered his kindness during the entrance exam. "Indeed. It's no wonder All Might wanted to thank him personally," Ida said with an expression of respect. "To be willing to face impossible odds without rewards in mind doesn't go unnoticed," he said earnestly while the two nodded in agreement. "No argument here," Mina stated happily. "Izu is definitely one of a kind," she finished with a dreamy sigh. Speaking of Izu, Ochako teased with a smile on her face. "Mind giving me more details about your date?" Mina was more than happy to gush about her date with Izuku. "Sure," she said with a smile, giggling when she saw Ochako's expression lit up in excitement while Ida appeared to be intrigued as well. But unbeknownst to them, Todoroki stared at them with interest before looking away. "So, All Might and Midoriya." He lightly hummed with a calculative expression as he processed what he heard. All Might's office. All Might and Izuku hastily entered the office, both having the pro's time limit in mind. Once inside, the teen locked the door behind him and checked to see if anyone else followed them. After nodding to himself, Izuku turned to All Might. "It's all clear." All Might didn't have to be told twice, as he reverted back to his real form with a puff of steam. "Much better," he sighed in relief while gesturing Izuku to sit on the sofa that was across another one. In the middle was a table, and on top of it was a bento box with a cup of tea on the side. After getting comfortable, All Might looked at his successor with a smile. "Now that that's settled, I would like to thank you for what you did during USJ." Izuku waved his hand. "It's no big deal, All Might. I just did what any hero would have done," he humbly stated with a smile. "I beg to differ," All Might stated, making Izuku look at him curiously. "What you did was no small feat, even when you knew the Nomu was created to fight me. You still fought him to protect those you cared for. And despite the pain you endured, you drove yourself beyond that and came back on top. And for that, I, and on behalf of everyone else, would like to thank you for what you did." Izuku was starting to tear up. All Might I dash. His mentor raised a hand. "Please," All Might stated calmly. "You've earned it, young Midoriya," he smiled proudly at the teen. After wiping his tears, Izuku nodded as he looked down at his lunch. Truthfully, he didn't want any sort of special treatment, just because he did something heroic. His mindset never focused on reward or glory. Only for the well-being of others is where his state of mind was always set. After finishing his meal, Izuku cleared the table and cleaned up whatever mess he left while All Might decided to make some more tea for the both of them. Once they were both seated again, All Might had a serious expression. "There's something else," he stated, gaining Izuku's attention. "What's the matter?" Izuku said with a worried tone. All Might sighed as he closed his eyes. "My time limit has reduced." Izuku was more than worried at this point. How long?" he hesitantly asked, not even sure if he wanted to know. "For 1.5 hours, All Might opened his eyes with a resigned expression. "Maybe more if I push myself," he added seriously. Izuku didn't know what to say as he looked down in worry. He knew that All Might's time limit would decrease over time, but he didn't think it would be at such a quick pace. But a thought did come across his mind. "But All Might," Izuku stated with a sad tone. "You weren't the one who faced Nomu, so how is your power still fading fast?" He looked at his mentor for answers. All Might was silent for a bit before he answered. "It's true that facing Nomu would have severely decreased my time limit." Izuku listened intently. "But keep in mind, as my power transfers to you, I gradually lose it regardless." So it didn't matter. Izuku thought in sadness as he looked down. Besides protecting his friends, he wanted to reduce the risk of All Might's time limit being affected during the confrontation. Sensing his successor's sadness, All Might spoke up. "Chin up, my boy," he calmly comforted, gaining Izuku's attention. "In the end you saved everyone and that's all that matters," the pro smiled. "Besides, your efforts weren't wasted since you still saved me more time," he ended without a trace of regret in his voice, as he gave the teen a thumbs up and a grateful grin. Izuku gave his mentor a sad smile before looking down again in worry, as a number of scenarios started playing in his mind. What if he suddenly transformed during a lecture? What if he suddenly lost all his powers during a villain fight? Or that he couldn't defend himself from a surprise attack? Or how about him losing his ability during a rescue operation? Or how about... But enough about that, All Might stated, cutting of Izuku's thoughts. Noticing that his successor was having a mental panic attack. "How goes your progress with OFA?" he asked with a curious expression. Snapping out of his somber state, Izuku glanced at his left hand. "Well, from what I can tell, I can pretty much use 10% of it. Going beyond that can still be risky," he ended with a serious expression. All Might, who had a hand to his chin. That's good progress," he looked up to the teen. "It seems your body is adjusting itself to handle the power better," he smiled. "I have no doubt you'll master it in no time," he finished with pride while Izuku smiled in return. The pro then stood up and walked to the window. "Frankly, I don't have much time left as the symbol of peace," he admitted with a serious look as he stared outside. While Izuku didn't know how to respond to that and looked to his lap with a tense expression. Taking the silence as permission, All Might continued. "And some of those who built up villainous intent are starting to realize," he turned back with a determined expression. "I granted you my power because I want you to succeed me," he then pointed to Izuku, who stood up from the declaration. "That same spirit you showed when I first met you is still there, yes?" "Yes," Izuku replied with no hesitation. At that response, All Might's expression hardened. "Then it's time for you to show that," he stated simply. "Huh?" the teen blurted out in confusion. All Might wasn't fazed by the confusion and continued. "The UA Sports Festival is something pro heroes know, the whole country is watching closely. That is why I want you to get out there and show them that you are here," he stated determinedly. Izuku could feel his jaw dropping. "WO," was the only thing he could say. Showing himself to the country wasn't the only thing he worried about. Different courses will be added to the mix, meaning in order to win this, he would have to go through a lot of talented students. Not only that, pros from all over will be watching, including his mom and Temi. So yeah, A little bit of pressure. All Might laughed as he placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. No need to worry, he calmly assured. Knowing you, you'll be spending the next 2 weeks training right. He received a stiff nod as a response. Then you'll do great. Snapping out of it, Izuku looked at All Might with determination. I'll give it my all. He swore with a light glow in his eyes. All Might had a prouder smile on his face. I expect nothing less, my boy. He declared with a thumbs up. And with that, Izuku left his office with a bit more weight on his shoulders, but felt more determined. 1A classroom. The class was ready to leave. All had plans to train for the festival. Well, they would have left, if it weren't for the massive crowd of students blocking the way. The fuck is this? Bakugo scowled in annoyance, while his classmates stared at the large crowd in front of them in shock. And from the crowd, a teen with purple hair and noticeable eye bags stepped to the front of the crowd. I came to see what the famous Class A was like, but from what I can tell you seem pretty arrogant, he said in a bored tone as he glanced around the room. Are all of you like this? He said in the same tone that could rival Aizawa. You want some of me eye bags? Bakugo growled while bringing his hands up. Eye bags, everyone thought with a sweat drop, wondering where Bakugo gets these nicknames. Izuku looked between the two and noticed the tension that filled the room. So with that he stepped between the two with hands raised. Whoa, easy guys, there's no need for this, he stated passively as he looked between the two. Bakugo looked like he wanted to argue but complied. Whatever, he huffed while heading back to join the rest of the class. After breathing a sigh of relief, Izuku turned to the purple-haired teen, who looked surprised by his interference. Sorry about Grumpy over there, he pointed a thumb at Bakugo who growled from the nickname. And to answer your question, we're not arrogant, that's just Bakugo being Bakugo, he shrugged with a grin. And just like that the tension started disappearing, as the crowd eyed him curiously, while some of his classmates chuckled at the nickname. Whereas Bakugo just scowled but decided not to say anything, knowing that Izuku would have a point if he spoke up. As for the purple-haired teen, he was surprised by how the person in front of him was acting. Like most students, he expected the students from the heroics course to brag about their accomplishments and show off their quirks. Instead, this person in front of him is acting like they're good friends. What's your name? The purple-haired teen asked. He figured that he should at least know the guy who's being nice so far. Izuku smiled and extended his hand, glad to see things becoming more civil. Izuku Midoriya, what's yours? The teen smiled back as he grabbed Izuku's hand. Hitoshi Shinso, he stated before having a curious expression. I gotta say, you're not exactly what I expected, he confessed as he ended the handshake. Izuku raised an eyebrow at him. What do you mean? He asked with a slight tilt of the head. Shinso thought about it before speaking. Honestly. He shrugged. I expected you guys to be show-offs or something, he stated bluntly before he lightly smiled. Glad to see I was wrong. Izuku smiled back. Well, I'm glad we cleared things up then, he said happily. Getting smiles from everyone except for Bakugo, who rolled his eyes. Shinso sighed as he rubbed the back of his head. Great, he groaned, making Izuku look at him curiously. Now I feel like a dick for declaring war on you guys, he ended with an annoyed sigh as he looked away. Izuku chuckled, gaining everyone's attention. It's fine, he waved it off. I mean, we're all going to face each other eventually, he simply pointed out with a shrug while Shinso thought about that statement. Shinso hummed in thought before looking at Izuku with a smile. Ha, guess you're right, he chuckled before smirking. May the best man win then, he added in a taunting tone. Sure, why not? Izuku chuckled as Shinso shook his head with a smile. With the tension completely gone, The crowd started dispersing, seeing that there isn't anything going to happen. While Izuku's classmates are relieved that the rumors about them were resolved sooner, rather than later. Fuck, Bakugo suddenly blurted out in annoyance, making his classmates turn to him curiously. Kirishima, who was beside him, voiced everyone's curiosity. What's up, Baku bro? Eyebags over there doesn't stand a chance, Bakugo stated like it's a fact, making his classmates look at him in disapproval. Kirishima placed a hand on his shoulder. Come on bro, he started. Sure Midoriya has a strong quirk, but I'm sure Shinso can handle himself, he pointed out in a semi-stern tone, while others nodded in agreement. Bakugo removed the teen's hand and glanced at him with an annoyed expression. I didn't mean that shitty hair, he denied, making everyone confused. I meant eyebags over there doesn't stand a chance against Deku's friendship shit, he clarified with exasperation. What do you mean? Momo asked, while everyone else turned to Bakugo waiting for clarification. Bakugo didn't bother with a verbal reply, and with an angry expression on his face, he gestured to what's in front of him with a sigh. Turning their heads, they can see Izuku and Shinso having a genuine conversation with smiles on their faces. And if you look closely, you can even see a warm aura that's emanating from them. While this was happening, Izuku's classmates looked at the scene in shock. He didn't know the guy very long, and yet they're talking to each other like they're good friends. They started wondering if there was such a thing as a friendship quirk. Noticing their expressions, Bakugo crossed his arms with a smug look. Told you, he stated with a shit-eating grin on his face. Weeks that followed. As planned, everyone spent the next weeks training themselves for the sports festival. Izuku focused on training his body to hold full cowling, while at the same time quickly switching to his original quirk. The point of this was to increase his endurance, as well as lessening the charge rate of OFA. But he did not just focus on his quirk alone, Izuku made sure to physically train as well. Not only does it help with stamina, but it can also help his body become more used to his power. At one point, he offered his friends to train together, but they respectfully declined. They wanted to find out how far they can reach through their own efforts. Days went by in a flash, and before they knew it, it was the day of the sports festival.